Alright. Well, I'm back. I wasn't really gonna come back here and write again, but so many of you wanted to hear more. More about my parents' ultimate end, or about different kinds of non-human entities. I guess a part of me was afraid that I was gonna get in trouble, but still, here I am. I guess I'm here to let you know how I observed between the point of the sixes lashed onto my mother and Mike, and how exactly it actually happened. First, I want to clear a few things that popped up in the comments. Okay, first of all, no, I'm not a six. That doesn't even make any sense, because being a human is the one thing that sixes crave, but they can't actually have. They can't communicate, use computers, or any of that. They pretty much can't do any basic human thing. I don't even think they have the capacity to consider communication. The second thing is I also haven't been a victim of a six. To be honest, I think it freaks them out that I can see them. So much so that they stayed far away from me. And lastly, I didn't mean to sound so apathetic in my original entry. To be quite honest, I was horrified, believe me, but my internal defenses told me that this was the only way that I had to get away from the beatings. The curiosity was so overpowering that I just had to see how it would turn out. This won't be much like my previous entry though. It will be a little less personal and a lot more documentary style, I guess you could say. I won't be going much into the fake haunting parts that the sixes create, because it's mostly uninteresting, to be honest. I just want you all to know how sixes affect human beings, not their surroundings. The first month was mostly normal, other than the fact that my parents became tired and very reclusive. The beatings slowed down a lot, to the point where it was only around the time where I would get too close or talk too much, which would annoy them both. There were times where they would both wake up screaming, and during the day they would constantly make comments on feeling as if they were being watched. I reassured them through gritted teeth that they weren't being watched, as I stared into the eyes of the being that only began to feed on them more. The second month, my parents began sleeping unreasonably long, like 17 hours at a time. Sometimes they'd even wet the bed. Of course, I had to clean it, but that's absolutely inhuman, but usually normal for subjects of sixes. Attempting to wake them, however, would be incredibly dangerous. But then again, it was like that before, only now it was amplified. At one point, I had to wake my mother up, only to ask her if I could borrow some bus fare to pay my way to a meeting that was supposedly dealing with the demonic haunting, which actually was just a poltergeist activity caused by a 17-year-old boy with acne problems. Anyway, she just shot up, turned her head slowly, and began to scream, the most deafening, inhuman scream imaginable. Thankfully, at this stage, they're just mostly drained of energy, so it wasn't a real attack. She just slapped me a few times before crawling slowly back into bed, falling asleep as soon as she hit the pillow. Month 3. The depressive stage, which is usually where we're most commonly called in to treat a case, if we're not already called in by the first month. My parents cut back to sleeping a few hours and just began sobbing about the absolute worst things all the time. They began to self-harm as well, right in front of me. While this was the least harmful month for me, it was the worst to watch. There were several points where I had wanted to tell them. I really did. But I knew they would be angry. Additionally, they both claimed to see red eyes behind their shoulders. Once again, I reassured them that I saw nothing. I felt really bad about it. Month 4. This is where things started to turn. They stopped sleeping almost entirely and talked almost constantly. I had never seen this phase personally, so I had no idea what to expect. I was sitting down on the couch when my mother sat down next to me, looked me in the eyes for the first time since I was little. But there wasn't love in her eyes. Not at all. I couldn't quite pin my finger on what it was, but she started to speak. She spoke so fast that it took me a minute to make out what she said. She said that she never wanted me. Not once in her life had she ever wanted me. She continued to tell me that when I was a baby, she thought about smothering me with a pillow and claiming SIDS. The only thing I have ever been good for to her was being a freak. This broke off into a month from hell. One that I'll do my best to forget after this. During this month, my parents lost their filter entirely. For all I know, they could have just been making things up to be intentionally hurtful. But it didn't seem like it. Month 5. I had been absent for a lot of this. We both became extremely violent, to the point where I was almost killed. I had been brushing my teeth one day when Mike burst into the bathroom. By this point, both of them were completely spastic almost all the time. He grabbed me by the back of my hair, kicked me in the back of the knees until I was down the floor. He dragged me by my hair over to the toilet. There, he attempted to drown me. I don't know what caused him to stop, but he got distracted before he could finish the job, thankfully. That's around the time I decided that I couldn't safely stick around. I couch surfed a few days until a friend with one of the gifts, Melina, let me stay with her indefinitely. I told her what was going on. She agreed that we would wait it out and keep an ear out. Melina can see what I can see, but she can also read moods and basically the aura of the place. We talked about how to handle the end of it all. She was completely against going around during the final day, but I just had to at least see what happens to 6s once they finish the job. Month 6. We showed up outside the apartment complex around 6 a.m. There were other inhuman entities outside the building. They were called Watchers. Watchers are pretty much explained by their name. They like to watch people do bad things. Not just murder and suicide either. Abuse, assault, all of that stuff. They feed off of it and they leave once the deed is over. They look almost like normal people, but they're yellowed like an old photo, and they have these awful grins on their faces. The only parts of them that move are their eyes. I've never seen them on a job, but I've seen them out in public in various places, which worried me to the point where I would have to go home. I can help with dead people, and I can even do a little about inhuman entities, but I can't make humans not do screwed up crap. It was around 9 a.m. that Melina became too overwhelmed by the awful feelings she was getting. So I told her that it was alright to go park down the block while I went inside to check in on them. She protested, but only for a second. I think she knew how important this was to me. The Watcher's eyes followed me from the car into the building as I exited the stairwell into the hallway of the floor my parents lived on. I heard an absolutely horrifying screech, and I knew that it was happening. I bolted, funneling to get my keys out of my bag. I undid the lock and swung the door open as fast as I could. The sixes were no longer on my parents' back. I think that was the first thing I noticed. They were crawling around them in circles. Mike was on top of my mother, pinning both of his arms down with his knees. It was a bloody scene. I had seen some horrible things during my gift experiences, but this kind of brutality was an entirely different chapter for me. I could tell that she was already gone, and the six that had been using her was only absorbing what was left inside. Mike turned to look at me, a horrible grin on his face, not unlike the ones I had seen surrounding me outside. With the knife he had only just used to kill my mother, he slit his own throat. I stood there, frozen, not sure what to do. I had imagined what this day would be like, but I never thought it would be so brutal. I guess a part of me assumed they'd just hang themselves, but that would be the least violent and not in their nature. Sixes circled around their bodies, a few minutes before I caught their eyes. They both became startled and quickly crawled up the wall past me and out the door. I dropped to my knees and sat for what felt like an eternity before a police officer dragged me away. One of the neighbors called the cops, I guess. I was brought down to the station, but all I could tell them was that my parents had been acting strangely for months. I was cleared to leave, and Melina took me back to her house, where I broke down, and it was the first time that I cried in front of a human being for what felt like years. I haven't worked a job for a six since then. I got emancipated on my 17th birthday, dropped out of high school, and moved into a small apartment across town. I quit doing jobs, but only for a short period of time. I still needed the money though, and nobody was going to hire me for normal work, not with my reputation. People in the gifted community knew that I allowed it to happen. The few people that were close enough to know that my parents were tyrants, they were understanding, and even somewhat grateful. I was a walking documentation of how it all happened. Everyone was afraid of me. I guess I've grown from the situation. Because of my documentary, we all know a lot more about sixes. I know how to stop them before it's too late. There are a lot less cases now that escalate fully. Still, I have this awful fear in the back of my mind that watching my parents die will break my spirit and eventually put a six on my back one day. I'm even more afraid of being condemned to hell for what I did, where I know my parents are waiting for me.